Once again, happy Sabbath. I know it sometimes seems like it's just performative, but I really am grateful for, one, each person in Sunnyvale, and also each person who makes this service what it is, from our deacons and our greeters who welcome us, just letting us know that it is another great day to be in Sunnyvale. To those who lead out in worship and share songs and welcome us, and those behind the scenes who might not ever step in front of the camera, but without them, we would not have this service or this church. So to each of you, I do say thank you. And to each of you, I also ask if you would, as God has been with you, if you can pray that God will be with me in this preaching moment. We've been in a series for 15 weeks looking at different miracles of Jesus. And so I want to say that this will be our last sermon in this particular series, The Moment. Pastor Rob kicked it off, like I said, 15 weeks ago, looking at Give Me a Minute, the healing of Peter's mother-in-law. And we're culminating today with a very well-known story. So as I've done before, I will solicit your prayers and your amens, and we'll see what God has for us. So, Father, I stretch my hands to thee. There's no other help I know. And if thou would draw thyself from me, Father, wherever would I go? We're so grateful that you have already made your presence felt today, in the fact that one has already publicly declared that they want to make you their choice, that we've been reminded that you're still doing new things and that you have plans for us, and also that you know our names and that you do hear us when we call, no matter what the situation looks like. So God, in the preaching moment, I'm asking that you would connect my mind to heaven, that there can be a clear picture painted of you, and that the words would be yours alone. Whatever has been studied or poured over this week, that you would, even at this last moment, have final editing rights to take things out or put them in. I'm asking that you'll make my words clear, and that somehow from what happens up here to what is heard in the pews, that people will see you clearly. So God, ultimately it's your thing, so do with it what you want to do. We thank you for how you're going to move. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen. The text says, and this is what happens. The text today is coming from John 11. And it reads, I'm picking up only a portion, the last portion of it, starting at verse 38. Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." I want to look at this story or text today from maybe a slightly different angle than we might usually hear it. I want to look at it from the topic, feeling some type of way. I heard one chuckle. When you look at the story of John 11, there are all kinds of people having all kinds of feelings. I would say, feeling some type of way, as one might say in a more colloquial way. You have Thomas early on saying, let's just go with him so we can die with him, feeling some type of way. You have Jesus in our text even saying, I'm just talking to you for the sake of these people around me, seemingly frustrated or agitated, feeling some type of way. John is different than the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Those three look at things the same way generally. What you find in Matthew, You'll find also Mark sometimes, which you find in Luke, you'll find in Mark sometimes. But generally, those three have probably about 80% of the same stories or the same perspective. But John has a slightly different one. John writes his book, or writes his gospel around a series of stories regarding belief. And the culminating story is the one we're looking at today, the story of Lazarus. And really, that's not a proper way to describe this story, because the story really, if you think about it, is not about Lazarus. Lazarus doesn't say anything in the story. And most of us, to be honest, have never been in Lazarus' shoes. If you have, I would love to talk to you after the service. But there are a couple of other people in here in the story that I think we might be able to relate to. Martha and Mary. I think that most of us, at some point in our lives, have been in the shoes of Martha or Mary, a place of disappointment or maybe disillusionment, feeling some type of way because things haven't gone as we expected. And I want to say there's nothing wrong with feeling some type of way. John the Baptist felt some type of way. If you remember, when he's in jail, he's saying, "Are you the one?" Talking about Jesus, or do we look for another? It's okay to feel some type of way. Even Jesus on the cross felt some type of way. My God, why have you forsaken me?" There's nothing wrong with feeling some type of way, whatever that way might be, and expressing it. And I would say that any relationship that you're in that makes you hide how you really feel, makes you lie about your frustration or disguise your anger, is not a healthy relationship. You cannot be connected in a healthy way if you have to hide your feelings, lie about your frustrations, or act as though you're never disappointed. And that includes our relationship with God. God is big enough to handle our feelings. And one place where feeling some type of way shows up clearly is in the circumstances surrounding the story of Lazarus, as found in John 11. You remember the story. I'm going to rely on either your familiarity with the story or on your commitment to read John chapter 11 and chapter 12 sometime this afternoon or later on today, just to kind of march through it. But a quick overview. Lazarus is sick. And although his family is concerned, they aren't really too worried. Why not? Because Lazarus has a friend that sticks closer than a brother. Lazarus has a friend who said, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." Lazarus has a friend who said, "Call on me and I will answer you." Lazarus has a friend named Jesus. And early in John chapter 11, we see that this family sends word to Jesus, who is only 2 miles away. And they say, "The one you love is sick." To their surprise, Jesus doesn't drop everything and run to Bethany. He doesn't even speak healing into the atmosphere like he did with the royal official's son. When Jesus hears the petition of Mary and Martha, he deliberately decides to stay where he is for 2 more days, and Lazarus dies. When Jesus finally arrives, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. And this is important because in Jewish tradition, they believed that when somebody died, that the spirit of that person would hover above the body for 3 days, possibly to re-enter it. So it's 4 days. All hope is gone now. Lazarus is dead. When you look at the story of Jairus' daughter, some people thought, well, maybe she was just in a coma, or, she wasn't really dead. You look at the widow of Nain, her son, when he passed, it was like, well, it hasn't been the full time yet. The spirit came back. This time, he's dead. Like, there's no debate amongst the Jews or amongst scholars, whatever else. And upon arriving in Bethany, Jesus is met by Martha, who is so upset that she runs out to the road, and she says, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died. If you had come when I had called you, if you had answered our prayer, if you had just done what we know you're able to do, this would not have happened." Jesus doesn't chastise her. Jesus doesn't say, "Calm down," because Jesus seems to understand that there are some moments where it's inevitable that we're going to be angry or frustrated with God. And there's nothing wrong with that. Being mad doesn't mean that you failed in your faith. It doesn't mean that you've broken up with God or you've gotten kicked out of the discipleship group. It's okay to be upset. Martha is angry. But Mary, when she finds out that Jesus is there, she stays in the house. She doesn't get up and run. There's no excitement. Mary's like, "I'm not feeling him today." This is the same Mary who John says sacrificed it all for Jesus, who Luke says always wanted to be around and up under Jesus when he came to the house. Martha's off doing the work. Mary's like, nope, I'm right here with Jesus doing this thing. This Mary who gave her devotional act to Jesus and who loves him has reached a point where she says, I'm not messing with him today. I'm not going over there. And notice how Jesus doesn't chastise her either. Jesus understands that sometimes today, right now, with what's gone on, I'm just not in that place. There can be times when we're disappointed and we feel like we just need a little space, even from God. I've never had a Martha moment, at least not too many. I can confess today, hopefully, I've been where Mary is. Not so much Martha where I'm angry and like putting my finger in God's face, but Mary saying, look, just give me a little space right now. Let me work this out in my head, if that's okay. There can be times that we might not feel like doing the worship thing. Martha is disgruntled. Mary's disappointed. Look at their words in verses 21 and 32. If you had been here, and you can fill it in with whatever you want, it wouldn't have gone down like this. If you had been here, this would not be my circumstance. How could you let this happen? I believe that there are three underlying sources for their feelings. Three things that cause them to be frustrated with the way things played out, and thus with Jesus. And these same things might sometimes pop up in our own lives or operate in our daily living and cause us to feel some type of way about God or towards God, making us disgruntled, maybe even trying to get a little distance from God. First, I would suggest that they are feeling some type of way because they need some things cleared up. Can somebody say cleared up? Cleared up. It's a phrasal verb, so it counts as one word. But they need to get the real point as far as theologically what it means to to have a devotional life, or what it means to pray, or what those are for. They need some things cleared up. They send message, Lord, he whom you love is very sick. So when Mary and Martha go to Jesus or send Jesus word about Lazarus being sick, they don't ask Jesus what to do, because their expectation is that when Jesus finds out what's happening to Lazarus, that Jesus will respond immediately. Why? Because of who they are. This is Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. This is Martha who regularly, according to Scripture, opened the doors of her home to Jesus, always entertained Jesus, had game nights with Jesus, hung out with Jesus. They had a good time. Jesus didn't have to sit here and ask, can I go to the fridge? He just did. They knew Jesus. She prepared a banquet or a feast in his honor. This is Mary, who sat at your feet and hung unto your every word, according to Luke 10. There was no pretense. They could just have conversation. Jesus didn't have to be on around these people. It wasn't like, let me act all pastorally, or it's just like, look, we can just talk and chill and just have real casual conversation. These are those who you love, these who you have gone the extra mile with. These are those who worship you and have served you. And surely when you think about who they are, about what they've done, you ought to respond. They're responding, they're reaching out to Jesus from a place of privilege. They're expecting that because of who they are, that surely the Lord will not allow Lazarus to die. And this is a privileged place that a lot of us can end up in when we're religious, and I mean that in a good way, or when we're devout. We can reach a place where we believe that because of our faithfulness, that some things that happen to others should never happen to us. I come to this place regularly. You know me. I believe we're cool. I read my Bible often. We have a real relationship. I'm no Amy Register, but dare I say I am a decent person. I don't do half the stuff I used to do. This can't happen to me. This struggle shouldn't happen to me. That sickness shouldn't land on my doorstep. Those problems that they went through, I shouldn't have to navigate. And we all recognize that, some stuff, we'll have to deal with, but not that. That might happen to other religious people, and seriously, God be with them, but not me. And we won't ever articulate that, but it's like, no, that can't happen to me. And like Martha and Mary, we can be in a place where we've reached out to God from a privileged position, because we've been in church a long time, or because we support the church with our time, our talent, or our treasure. Or maybe we have a title in church, or we're close to someone who can get a prayer through. Whatever might be the case, we reach out to God with elevated expectations as to how God should respond, only to at some point find ourselves disappointed. We always heard it, but it didn't fully register to us that being devout doesn't grant us immunity from trouble or pains in this life. That prayer doesn't keep everything from happening to us. We need some things cleared up. Some of us, I would say without realizing it, we think that our good behavior, that our piety is a quid pro quo, that it forces or inclines God to do something on our behalf when it doesn't. Holiness is not something we offer up to God to have a better life. Prayer isn't something we do to guarantee that we get what we want. And they think, seemingly because they are devoted or committed to Christ, and because they have sincerely prayed, that this shouldn't have happened. So 2 things just to clear up, righteousness or piety, and then prayer. So what is righteousness? Like I said, it's not a quid pro quo. I do this so that God will do that. And sometimes a surface reading or a very casual reading of John 11 might make somebody think that way. What are you talking about? When John shares with us the credentials of Mary and Martha at the top of John 11, in 11 verse 2, he describes Mary as the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Now, when he does this, he's employing a literary tool called prolepsis. Prolepsis is when a writer takes something that hasn't happened yet and starts sharing it presently as if it has already transpired. Are you still with me? It's taking a future event, describing it in the present as if it happened in the past already. An example of this is the listing of the disciples. Often when you read through Scripture and you see the disciples listed, you'll see, James and Peter, or James and John, Andrew and Peter, Thaddeus, whoever else, and it usually ends with Judas. And it usually says Judas, the one who betrayed him. Even when they're being introduced, it says it like that. Even though Judas has not yet betrayed anybody, it's prolepsis. So what John does in verse 11 is proleptic, talking about Mary's the one who wiped Jesus' feet with her hair. But what's the point? Like, what? So, okay, you used a fancy word, but why are you using this? Because Mary's act of righteousness, her act of worship, at least the one that she's most commonly known for, comes after Jesus has resurrected her brother. It comes after Lazarus is raised from the dead. She does her act of worship or devotion in response to what God has done, not as a way of getting God to do something. Mary's righteousness is not a tool to make Jesus act. It's not an investment in some future work of God. The good stuff that we do, our ministry, our service to God, is always in response to the grace that we've already received. It's not an investment in future mercy. So sticking with the narrative, what's the purpose of prayer? If I have a loved one who's dying, is God waiting for me to pray so that God can show up and intervene to help them? Are they going to be healed if I don't pray? Will they die if I don't pray? Does my prayer change the will of God or the outcome? What is the purpose of prayer? At least with this outcome, at least with this narrative. And before I go any further, just to be clear, I believe prayer changes everything. Yet I've been in some places where prayer didn't change anything at all. I believe we serve a God who hears and answers prayers. Yet I've been in a place where I prayed, and what I prayed for, the exact opposite happened. There are a lot of things that I don't know about God, a lot of things I won't pretend to understand, but one thing that I am firmly grounded on in my own thinking is that prayer is not a tool to manipulate or maneuver God. That the purpose of prayer is not to change what God is doing or even what God is allowing. But the purpose of prayer is to help us to see what God is doing. To see how God is attempting to work towards the good in some kind of situation, to work towards some kind of good. To see how God can somehow salvage this thing and be glorified in this situation. The primary purpose of prayer is not to change what God is doing. It's to see the glory behind how God is moving. Mary and Martha call on Jesus. They pray. And when Jesus shows up, he lets them know, your calling on me is not going to change what happened to Lazarus. But it will put you in a position to see what I'm trying to show you. The real power of prayer isn't whether or not it changes what is happening. It's whether or not it changes what you see, allowing you to see God in ways and places that you might have previously missed. Prayer is not about getting an answer or getting the answer, but it's about seeing what God is up to. I've mentioned before that I enjoy movies. I enjoy them so much that I go by myself because I don't want to talk to you in the movie. I enjoy them so much that I go during the off-peak hours. I go during the middle of the day because I don't want the theater full of people laughing where I miss the dialogue. I don't want people saying, ah, and then, so I miss what was happening next. Like, I like movies. I try to get involved in movies, like put myself in the narrative. I don't want you here chopping it up with me. No. Are we here to talk or here to watch the movie? Okay. So, I have my own issues. I'm still working them out. One thing I don't like, I've never much cared for, are 3D movies. I feel like they're gimmicky. Like, one, they cost more than I want to pay. I'm on a budget. Two, I feel like they're just there to kind of, have stuff come out to you, like, just to kind of jar you a little bit. I'm like, that's no point to that. And also, I just don't really like wearing the glasses. I don't like something on my face like that long, whatever else. I'm good. But there was one movie, actually, there are two movies I've seen in 3D, because I was told they have to be seen in 3D. They were Up and Avatar. We lost the R's after Up. But no, I enjoyed both of those. But I remember Avatar was made for 3D. Like, it was like, the reviews are like, look, if you see it regularly, it's a great movie, but you got to see it in 3D to really get the full effect. I remember when I saw Avatar, I'm in the theater, middle of the day, I'm taking a long lunch, so no one should be here. And to my despair, there's a little boy with, I assume his grandfather, and we sit in the same row, and I'm like, oh my goodness, okay, fine. So of course they start talking to the movie, so I give my passive-aggressive look like, no, watch the movie. And so at one point, the little boy actually has the glasses off, and I hear the man say, you got to put the glasses on, otherwise you're going to miss the beauty of this. You're going to miss it. And that never meant anything to me before. I was like, obviously, if you had to tell somebody to keep their 3D glasses on, they might be a little too young for a 3D movie. But the greater point being, you're going to miss some of the beauty, some of the things that were meant for you to see if you don't have these glasses on, if you don't keep these things on. And if you don't have your prayer glasses on, we're going to miss it. It's one thing to just look at what's happening. But when we've got the glasses on, we're able to see some things that might have looked real crazy otherwise. And we'll need our prayer glasses on to see just a little bit of what God's trying to do. Something that God's like, look, I'm showing this one for you. I know it hurts, but if we keep talking to God, we might see God in a way that we would have missed without prayer. Part of the reason people feel some type of way is because they've limited prayer to the answer that they wanted. When in actuality, prayer is meant to open our eyes and reveal something about God. That's why sometimes we can find people who are really going through it, but they still have a smile on their face because they've seen that God is up to something bigger than them. Mary and Martha are feeling some type of way because they've come in a privileged position. They needed some things cleared up. But next, what else fuels their anger, frustration, disappointment is that they've come to God comparing. Can somebody say comparing? They're coming in a context of comparison. The text says, Lord, your dear friend is very sick. That's the NLT. Another version says, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. That's the New American Standard Bible. The NIV says, Lord, the one you love is sick. We often read over this and don't really think much about it. But part of the reason why they're feeling the way they do is because they are comparing themselves. What do you mean? They send word to Jesus, and they could have just said, Lazarus is sick. Jesus obviously knows he loves Lazarus. Why do they have to say, Lord, the one you love is sick? Why do they have to identify Lazarus in that way. They want to remind Jesus, Lazarus is not a stranger, and we've seen you heal strangers. Jairus didn't know you. You healed his daughter. The woman with the issue of blood had never met you before. She got what she needed. Bartimaeus on the side of the road had never said anything about you before, but you opened up his blinded eyes. Legion was filled with demons. You just stumbled upon him in the cemetery, but he got delivered. You didn't even know anybody at the wedding in Cana, but you made sure that the drink kept on flowing, that the party kept on going. And if you did all this for strangers, then surely you ought to do something for me. Do something for the one you love. They compare themselves with strangers that God has blessed, and they expect that God will do more. Sometimes our disillusionment with God really isn't about what God didn't do for me. Our feelings came in when we saw what God did for somebody else, and we're like, God, that's not fair. Look at how devout I've tried to be. The number of times I came to church, the people I didn't talk badly about, even though they were running their mouths about me. I'm not half as bad as I used to be. And I'm trying to do right, yet look at what you're doing for everybody else. You're going to do all that for them, but let Lazarus die? You're going to heal strangers, but then let us go through this. They don't even love you like we love you. They don't know you like we do. There's a group there with Mary and Martha described as the Jews. And John, he just describes the enemies of Jesus or the religious leaders as the Jews. So it's not an entire nation or religion. It's just a group of people. And verse 37, it says that when Jesus shows up, that this group of people say to Mary and Martha, couldn't the man who healed all those strangers have treated you any better? That's my paraphrase. It really says, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? The people around Mary and Martha encouraged them to compare what Jesus had done for others to what Jesus had done or not done for them. To paraphrase Paul in 1 Corinthians 4, nothing good comes from comparing your life to someone else's. One of the worst things we can do in life is to compare the reality of our whole circumstance to a snapshot of somebody else's. If you've been looking at other people and are feeling like God has been or is doing you wrong, you need to stop comparing. If you've been watching someone else's life and you're wondering why God hasn't done that with you, you got to stop comparing. Some of you, maybe not all of you, but some of you might need to take a break from social media. Hop off the gram for a bit. You've been looking at filtered, perfectly angled snapshots of people's lives and comparing it to your reality. Just learn to be grateful what God is doing for you. Jesus shows up and realizes that they are comparing themselves and what is their current situation to other people. And he says, basically, don't worry about that. Don't worry about Jairus' daughter. Don't worry about, this person or that person. I'm still able to do something for you. Don't worry about all the other people. Just be right here in this moment and know that God can still do something for you. Stop comparing your life to somebody else's. When you're wondering why them and not you, I want you to know that you serve a God who's still able to bless your life. So they're feeling some type of way because they're coming from a privileged position. They need some things cleared up. They're feeling some type of way because they are comparing. And finally, they are feeling some type of way because they can't quite comprehend. Can somebody say comprehend? They are struggling with the fact that God is sovereign. They're struggling with sovereignty. One of the things that will frustrate us most with God is when God proves that God is bigger than what we thought. That God is not confined to your box or to your SOPs. That God operates outside of any way that we actually can or will understand. They call on Jesus, making him aware that Lazarus is sick. Yet he makes a deliberate decision to stay 2 more days where he is, with no explanation. He's 2 miles away. His friend is sick, and he doesn't show up. That doesn't make any sense. Jesus could have made it there fairly quickly, but he decides to stay where he is. Why? When you do your exegetical homework on John 11, there are a whole lot of scholars that try to make sense of why Jesus stayed where he did for those 2 days. And they come up with all kinds of reasons. Theologians and Bible commentators have spent years coming up with different hypotheses about why Jesus stayed for 2 days. Everybody has a theory. Everybody has an opinion. But one of my, I would say, favorite authors or writers, Gerard Sloyan, he says this, and this is what actually stuck with me, that no matter what answer other people came up with or have come up with or will come up with, that it would never make sense to Mary and Martha. It did not make sense to them. And honestly, it never would. That what God does, others may have thought through, or they may even have cliche answers. But those cliches, those answers that you came up with, that are so scholarly, those would not have made sense or done anything for Mary and Martha. Have you ever been in a place where you struggled with why God did something, or did not do something, or allowed something, and all you got from religious people were cliche answers or platitudes? This too shall pass. Okay. Tomorrow is another day. What else would tomorrow be? He'll never put more on you than you can bear. First off, read your Bible. It's talking about temptation. Like, if you're going to come, at least come correct. Like, I'm sorry, I don't want to be that guy, but I am. So, you will experience a God whose sovereignty at times will leave you with a whole bunch of questions and with no answers. And sometimes in churches or in small groups, we want to peddle like that we have answers for God and that we understand things about God. And here's why God does this, and this is why God does that. But if we truly believe that God is sovereign, then it means that at some moment, God will be more of a mystery than a certainty. That there will be moments in your life and in mine when we don't understand why God let it go down like that. That there will be struggles or situations where I can't seem to find an answer in Scripture, and the preacher is stumped. There will be things that we go through that will never make sense to us, and we won't understand how or why God could let it go down like that. Have you ever been in a place where God left you scratching your head and did not give you an answer? Did not perform the way that you knew God could have performed? That what God allowed didn't resonate with what that pastor or that elder or that church leader described God to do or described God to be like? There are moments, like I said, when God is more of a mystery than a puzzle that we've solved or unlocked. Paul reminds the church at Corinth that we are just stewards of the mystery of God. And as uncomfortable as it might be, no matter how much Bible we read, no matter who you study with, no matter how long you go to church, or how many degrees you put on the wall, we may never understand some things in our human frailty. God's ways truly are not our ways. And we're going to have to learn to live with a God that we don't always understand, that we don't always comprehend. You and I may never be brought to a point of understanding certain things. So when Jesus shows up, he knows Martha and Mary are feeling some type of way because they don't understand why this has happened. He comes 4 days late. Lazarus is already buried, and he doesn't even tell them why. Sometimes we don't get the benefit of why. I've said it before, and I will say it again. Every problem in life, no matter what it is, boils down to one question. No matter how bad it is, no matter how difficult it is, no matter how long we're in the situation, no matter how dire it might be, it always comes down to one question that you and I have to answer. Do you trust God? Can you still believe God? Now, many of us have heard John 11 preached. If I was betting, you might have heard it preached or discussed 100 times. And often when we get to the most famous part of this text, that Jesus wept, people often interpret this because that Jesus wept because Lazarus has died. And I don't want to sit here and throw anybody under a bus, but this simply is not true. It's not. Go back, just keep on reading through John, and let me see if I can build on this. No doubt, heaven hurts when we hurt. I believe that 100%. Look at the Psalms, look at Jesus. There's no doubt in my mind that heaven feels a certain way when we do. Anyone who is human, if they see somebody they love crying or going through something, they can't help but feel pain as well. So I don't doubt that. Jesus is for sure moved because Mary and Martha are crying. I think that their grief does become his grief. But Jesus, I would say, is really crying or really pained because of the unbelief of those around him. Remember we said before, 2 weeks ago, that belief in the Bible is not simply saying I agree or that I know, it's saying I surrender. Jesus already knew that Lazarus was going to die. He said it in verse 14, Lazarus is dead. And he already knew that he was going to get him up. In verse 4, he said, this sickness will not end in death. In verse 11, Lazarus is asleep, and I'm going to wake him up. He knew he was going to get Lazarus out of the grave. So I don't believe that the tears he is experiencing, that he's crying, is because Lazarus is dead. He says to Martha, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? And then he prays this, Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me. I'm just saying this for the sake of those around me so that they may come to believe. Remember, John's whole gospel is about belief. He even gives us his thesis in John chapter 20. His thesis, the whole reason he writes this book, he says in John chapter 20, now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. That's what Jesus, according to John, has been trying to do since day one. And John makes that clear all through his gospel. And the question is today, do you believe? In John chapter 2, when Jesus shows up at that wedding feast in Cana and turns water into wine, by the time he gets to verse 11, it says that the disciples believed in him. Do you believe he can take your ordinary and make something extraordinary out of it? He's made a believer out of me. In John chapter 4, when he shows up at that well and starts talking to that Syrophoenician woman, and she ends up telling the entire city, come see a man who told me everything about myself. When you get to verses 39 to 42, because of her testimony, it says that many Samaritans in the city believed and that they knew that he was the Savior of the world. Do you believe that no matter what kind of baggage you might have, that Jesus can still use you to be a blessing to everyone in your path? He's made a believer out of me. In John chapter 5, Jesus shows up at that pool of Bethesda, where everyone there is described as lame, withered, and halt. And they're all on the margins of society. And there's a man who's been paralyzed for 38 years. And Jesus says, Jesus gives him just one word. And the thing today is, even if you've been powerless or ineffective for so long, at Jesus' word, you can be on your way. He's made a believer out of me. In John chapter 6, on the other side of Galilee, when he's teaching 5,000 people, not including women or children, he takes a little boy's lunch and takes 2 fish, 5 loaves of bread, and he lifts up and gives thanks, letting us know that little becomes much when we place it in the master's hands. That you thought your resources were too meager or your talents were too few, but if you put them in God's hands, that Jesus can take what we have and do exceeding abundantly above all that we can ask or think. Do you believe it? He's made a believer out of me. In John chapter 8, there's a woman who's caught in the act of adultery. There are people trying to stone her. Jesus says the person without sin can cast the first stone. No one throws a stone that day. Do you believe that Jesus, if you allow him to, can pull you out of a sinful situation and give you a new trajectory on life? He's made a believer out of me. In John chapter 9, we come across a man who was born blind, and nowhere else in the Bible is anybody described as having been born blind. Jesus tells him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. The man went, he washed, and he comes back seeing. Do you believe that Jesus can bring light into your darkness? That Jesus can still reveal some stuff to you? Jesus has made a believer out of me. In John chapter 10, he teaches, I come that they may have life and have it more abundantly. And by the time you get to the end of that, of his teaching, in chapter 10, it says that everyone around him was like, this guy's different. There's something about him, and they believe in him. And finally, you get to John chapter 11, and things don't go as expected. Lazarus is dead for 4 days, and Jesus shows up, and when he's involved, he shows that there's always a reason to have hope, that there's always a reason to have trust in God. Do you believe this? But the truth of the story is this, that Lazarus, it reminds us that we won't always get the miracle that we want, that we won't always get what we've been praying for. And more important than believing God, than understanding God is believing. And there comes a time that you might not get the healing that you wanted. The healing that they prayed for, they never got. Read the story. We celebrate what happened, but they never got what they prayed for. And the reality of our situation is that we will not always get what we're praying for. That healing will not always take place. And the question is, do you believe even in those times? Will you stick with God even in those times? The real beauty of the passage today is that Martha says, Lord, if you had been here. But then she says, even now, I know you're able. And I want to know that when you don't have anything else to hope for, when you haven't gotten the healing, and all you can look forward to is a resurrection, will you still believe? Do you trust God? When the doctor says stage 4, will you trust God? When the one who said I do is now saying I don't, will you trust God? When that bill seems so enormous that you don't have any way to respond to it, will you trust God? When that loved one dies before their time, will you still trust God? Even when you don't understand it, even when it doesn't go how you expected, will you trust God? Can you stick with God long enough to possibly just see what God might be up to see what God's trying to reveal to you? When there is no healing, when the answer to prayer didn't come how you wanted, and all you have now is a hope for a resurrection, can you trust God? When you're feeling some type of way, keep clear what righteousness and prayer are. When you're feeling some type of way, remember that comparisons get us nowhere. When you're feeling some type of way, comprehension is not always promised on this side of glory. But when you're feeling some type of way, we know that we have a friend who sticks closer to a brother, who sticks closer than a brother, and a friend who is still here with us. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That's true. But Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written about in this book. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing, you may have life in his name, even when you're feeling some type of way.